Hyundai will soon lock some in-car features behind a paywall. This move is very similar to what BMW tried to do last year, where they made heated seats part of a subscription service after you had already purchased the car, and even though the hardware was already there. Well, Hyundai says, you know what? We want a part of that in our smarter cars in the future. We want in-app or in-car purchases in our vehicles. And this is part of Hyundai's Features on Demand program, which is marketing jargon for pay-to-use features. So not only will you buy a Hyundai car, but you'll have multiple levels of subscription service in your Hyundai car that unlock various features. This is on the agenda of the newly founded Hyundai Connected Mobility, which was established in Europe last month, and it brings together the Mosi car subscription and Blue Link service programs. And I think that this is terrible. Terrible. Hyundai isn't exactly being forthcoming about what features they're going to roll out. The most common example is BMW's heated seats, but they're saying that I think it's exciting. It's going to bring new features into older cars is their marketing jargon. And the reality behind that is software updates could improve the performance of electric motors and batteries and stuff in some of their smart cars, but you can't download heated seats. You can't download a leather steering wheel. BMW got flamed for this horrifically. I don't know why. Well, I do know. We're about to get to why. You would say if the feedback is so bad, why would any car company do this? Well, marketing firms are estimating that in-car automotive features are going to be worth about an extra $4.3 billion to the industry by 2026, so a year and a half from now. And by 2030, in-car purchase features are going to be worth over $20 billion. Which is insane. And I promise you, as much as I love EVs and efficient vehicles and good stuff, I will go buy an old beater diesel truck and I will burn fossil sauce and pollute the environment until the end of time before I have a subscription service for a car that I've already bought. A revolutionary new quantum compass could soon make GPS-free navigation a reality, as in this device pictured here, which is a quantum compass, could soon replace GPSs in general and render the system completely obsolete. And while this chip isn't small enough or practical enough or durable enough or portable enough yet, it is on its way. It's already gone down about 1,000 times in size since the project started, and what scientists have decided to built is effectively a motion sensing device, very similar to the ones that you would find in almost any common cell phone these days, and it tracks motion perfectly with an outrageous amount of accuracy. So as long as it knows its starting position, it'll pretty much always be accurate, like an atomic clock. You know, it's almost never off. Now, this is an incredibly complicated thing, and one of the reasons that we're building this is because they believe that accurate navigation via GPS becomes a challenge in real-world scenarios when GPS signals are unavailable, such as war zones, anywhere there's a security risk, if there's electronic warfare that jams the satellites, and it's a matter of national security to have a backup to the GPS system that we all rely on. Well, what they've made here is an atom interferometer, which is a sensor system that fills a small room, a complete quantum compass, and more precisely called a quantum inertial measurement unit, would typically require 6 atom interferometers. On top of that, they would need a power-hungry vacuum pump, they would need a lot of large components, and what they've managed to do is replace this vacuum pump with an avocado-sized vacuum chamber, replace a lot of the large components, move it down from 6 to 1, and do a whole variety of things, to where the new modulator is the centerpiece of a new laser system on a microchip that's rugged enough to handle vibrations, and it would then replace a conventional laser system that would be typically the size of the refrigerator, and these days they do have it down to about cell phone size, but that's like the whole device. They want it smaller. They want it to be a little chip, a little dot, something you put inside of it, which is extremely impressive. There's a suppressed carrier that reduces sidebands, resulting in a 1,000-fold drop in sound and light intensity, and they want to make this silicon device more mass producible and more affordable. Because as of right now, they can make these on 8 and 12-inch wafers, which are, again, slightly bigger than a cell phone, but they want it to be small enough to be a part of a cell phone. And they want it to be part of like the standard manufacturing process of almost any sort of GPS or location devices. And I think that's a good thing. Then we can repurpose all the GPS satellites and do something more useful with them. And we have our perfect quantum trackers here that'll be, I don't know, accurate for at least 1,000 years or so. I think this is awesome technology. I don't know if it seems awesome to you. It's a little bit of a nerdy thing, but I'm all here for it. Apple is looking to make even more money by changing the math on Patreon, i.e. they plan to apply the 30% iOS tax to all purchases made in the Patreon app, which immediately passes that tax on to the creator and to the fans trying to support them. And Patreon says they have little choice but to just pay these taxes and deal with it, otherwise they lose the iOS app and a huge chunk of their market. So content creators who use Patreon to get some sort of support are going to end up losing revenue up to 30% Apple tax on all transactions completed on the iOS app on devices such as iPhones and iPads, which is probably over 50% of the purchases, to be honest with you. This isn't exactly a new thing. As the article correctly points out, Apple already applies this fee to many other apps on their App Store, and it didn't enforce this with Patreon until recently. Now, there's always the workaround. You can just go to the website through Safari, or you can just do it at a web browser at home. But the vast majority of people these days aren't using web browsers or desktop PCs. It's kind of an all app-based economy, so a lot of people probably wouldn't even think to do that. And Patreon says it doesn't have much flexibility with this change and is trying its best to prevent it from seriously disrupting creators' earnings. What they're talking about doing is increasing prices for all iOS customers. So it's kind of like, if you buy V-Bucks for $10 on Android, it might be 13, 14, 15 on iOS. It'll be the same here on Patreon. Patreon says it wants to increase its prices to offset the Apple tax. Now, that doesn't directly cost creators. They use this fellow as an example here, Craig Baird. But what it does do as you increase prices is it makes people less likely to pay that money and less likely to sign up, which therefore does indirectly lower the revenue of creators. And again, Patreon says they have no choice but to comply or just be removed from the App Store, which would be catastrophic from their business. And it's very, very sad. I would encourage people to swap over and just use a desktop app, just use a browser or something like that. But it's kind of sad because Patreon isn't exactly a giant company. It's not exactly a giant moneymaker. It's a place where a lot of fans coalesce to support their creators and help fund the content they want to see. And Apple's like, no, you can't do that without paying me a tax, and I'll tax you more than the government. I might have missed a small tech revolution here, but Waymo is claiming that it doubled its weekly paid robotaxi trips up to 100,000 since May. And I want to emphasize on this, that's 100,000 trips per week in a paid, autonomously driven robotaxi. Now, I'll admit that I don't live in California where the majority of these robotaxis operate, but I was very shocked to hear this number. I don't really see them in Texas. I don't really think about them. It's not really on my radar. But apparently they're doing 100,000 paid robotaxi trips a week just in California, which is insane to me. And Alphabet, the parent company of Google, announced in July that it would invest another $5 billion into the driverless vehicle venture. And that makes total sense. If you're doing 100K trips a week, a $5 billion investment is very, very reasonable. And Waymo says that they plan to expand the service beyond the Sunbelt states, California, where it now operates, with its Generation 6 system integrated into Geekly Zeekr electric vehicles. And perhaps somebody in the comments can speak up or explain this. So I have seen Waymos before. I'm familiar with the company. I knew that they existed. I thought that they were niche. I thought that nobody was using them. I didn't think Waymo was doing 100,000 robotaxi trips a week. That's a whole enterprise. That's an industry. That's no longer niche. That's no longer nothing. And it does that only in a couple of cities. This is something that is getting ready to be scaled and deployed en masse, and that might replace taxis and driving in general. I can't believe they haven't had more crashes. I know that they've had problems, but that's just downright shocking. I did find out they've been working on this since 2009, which kind of makes sense. It takes a long time to develop technology, which is why Tesla still doesn't have full self-driving. But they have 700 vehicles in their fleet operating its commercial robotaxi service called Waymo One. And they did do this in Phoenix, Arizona, but for the most part, this is Los Angeles, somewhere Daly City, Baltimore, Colma. They want to expand to San Francisco. And they said that they've had over 14.8 million miles driven in robotaxis, and they have 3.5 times less crashes and better performance. So this is coming from a very official source, very much so at Google, and I'm just genuinely shocked. There's not a lot of insight into this. For those of us that don't live in Phoenix or California, this probably went right over your head just like it did mine. And I gotta say, I'm like impressed. I would love for there to be a future of self-driving robo-taxis, and it looks like I'm gonna get that.